In the early 1980s, in the state of Washington near Seattle, police found the bodies of young women one after another along the banks of the Green River. The disappearances occurred suddenly and without any trace, and the investigation dragged on for years without success. Fear grew in the community, and investigators could not understand who was behind these terrible crimes. The media gave this unknown person the nickname Green River Killer. This name quickly became a symbol of terror that gripped the entire region, and the beginning of one of the most complex criminal cases in U.S. history. In reality, he led an almost inconspicuous life. His name was Gary Leon Ridgway, a man who for years deceived society, the police, and even those who were next to him every day. Gary Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah. His childhood was hardly a happy one. The family was often quarrelsome and tense, and his father, who worked as a bus driver, spent a lot of time away from home. His mother was extremely strict, emotionally dominant, and controlling, which created additional pressure on the children. Gary did not excel in school. He had serious learning difficulties and was significantly behind his peers. Official tests showed an IQ of about 82, below average, which only made it difficult for him to socialize. His classmates remembered him as a quiet, withdrawn, and slightly strange boy who rarely participated in conversations and had no close friends. After graduating from high school, Gary Ridgway decided to change his life and joined the U.S. Navy. The service was his first real exit into the adult world. He completed basic training and was later sent overseas, including to Vietnam, where American troops were still actively engaged in combat. The atmosphere of war, constant pressure, and strict discipline left their mark on him. After his discharge, Ridgway returned to his homeland a different person. Calm on the outside, but increasingly withdrawn on the inside. Having settled in Washington state, he tried to build a normal life. At first he got married, but the marriage quickly fell apart. Over the years, he started a new family, trying to appear as a responsible husband and father. Eventually, he got a steady job at a truck factory, where he would work most of his life. Colleagues described him as a quiet, calm worker who rarely got into conflicts and always did his job. He did not abuse alcohol, did not get into fights, did not attract unnecessary attention to himself. At first glance, he was an ordinary man from the suburbs who worked honestly, paid his taxes, and returned home on time. And it was this ordinariness that became his best cover. Ridgway skillfully fit into society without arousing suspicion. He behaved so ordinary and predictable that even the people who were next to him every day could not imagine how dark his hidden side was. While the police were fruitlessly searching for a serial killer, Gary lived peacefully in the community, continued to work, go to church, and communicate with his neighbors. No one guessed that under the mask of a normal family man was hiding a person who had committed dozens of terrible crimes and remained beyond suspicion for years. Summer 1982. In the suburbs of Seattle, young women begin to disappear. At first, it seems like isolated cases. Some have left the city, some have broken up with their families, some work on the streets and could suddenly change neighborhoods. But it quickly becomes clear that something is wrong. Families raise the alarm, disappearances become more frequent, and the streets of Seattle are covered in anxiety. Soon, the police find the first bodies. The crime scenes are along the quiet Green River, where locals usually rest. These are not deep forests, not distant deserts. These are ordinary, familiar corners, not far from residential areas. That is what is most terrifying. The criminal acts where anyone can see him and yet remains elusive. The victims are young women. Many of them are sex workers or teenagers who have run away from home in search of a better life. This made them vulnerable. They had no support, often distrusted the police, and their disappearances were not always immediately investigated. The perpetrator knew this and took advantage of their defenselessness. At first, the police did not understand that they were dealing with a serial killer. The bodies were found in different places, sometimes weeks or months after the disappearance. And only when the number of cases exceeded a dozen did it become clear. These were not random crimes. This was a methodical, cold-blooded hunt. The criminal acted according to a certain pattern. He chose a victim, lured her into a car, and then disposed of the body where he was sure he would not be noticed. The media quickly gave him the nickname, Green River Killer. The Green River Killer. Newspapers and television reported on new finds. Residents of King County were afraid to let their children out of their homes, and the police found themselves under enormous public pressure. It seemed that an invisible monster was at work in the city, which could strike at any moment. A large-scale investigation began. A special group of the best detectives was created who worked around the clock. A mountain of documents, protocols, interrogations, hundreds of witnesses, thousands of hours of work, but it almost did not yield results. The killer acted carefully, did not leave obvious traces, knew how to deceive both the police and the system itself, and would become a symbol of how difficult it is to detect a serial killer who lives a completely ordinary life on the outside. In 1984, as the number of victims continued to grow, Washington state authorities decided to take more decisive action. A special investigative group was created, the Green River Task Force. It was one of the largest teams in U.S. criminal history. It employed dozens of experienced detectives, analysts, forensic scientists, and psychological profilers. All of them had one goal: to find the man who had been keeping King County in fear for years. The group's work was unprecedented in scale. They collected hundreds of samples of evidence: clothing, fibers, tire tracks, shoe prints, plastic fragments, any little thing that could have any value. Thousands of witnesses were interviewed: drivers, restaurant workers, residents of the area, people who had last seen the victims. Each conversation could be the key to the solution, but at the same time, it created dozens of new pages of reports and even more questions. The detectives created a huge database of possible suspects. The lists were constantly updated. Someone dropped out, someone, on the contrary, attracted more attention. And among the hundreds of names, one kept appearing: Gary Leon Ridgway. Ridgway came into view for a reason. He often visited the area of Southern Route 99, the place where many of the victims worked. He stopped there so regularly that several witnesses pointed out his pickup truck. In 1982, one woman even reported that he behaved strangely and aggressively with her. But then this did not develop. When the task force began to check everyone who could be somehow connected to the disappearances, Ridgway's name surfaced again. Detectives spoke with him several times. He was quiet, polite, almost inconspicuous. He knew how to keep himself calm, answered without emotion, and never seemed nervous. He insisted that he was simply giving women rides because he felt sorry for them, and investigators found no direct evidence against him. In 1987, a DNA sample was taken from him, a groundbreaking step at the time. But that was where the biggest obstacle arose. The analysis technology was still too weak to compare samples found at crime scenes. What takes a few hours today could take months back then, and still not yield an accurate result. In Ridgway's case, no matches were found. The investigation seemed to have reached a dead end. Tons of data were accumulating, but not a single thread led to a specific person. The evidence was either insufficient or corrupted by time. Suspects appeared and disappeared from the list, while the real killer continued to act. While the massive investigation was ongoing, Gary Ridgway lived as if nothing unusual was happening around him. He went to work every day, greeted colleagues, attended church and family holidays. All this created the image of an ordinary, calm man who did not fit into the picture of a serial killer. His colleagues at the truck factory remembered Ridgway as a quiet, reserved, and very hard-working worker. He was never late, did not conflict, always did his job on time. To many, he was just another worker in overalls who came and went with everyone else. He even seemed a bit boring, a person who lives by schedule and does not have bright emotions. At the same time, Ridgway tried to maintain the image of a decent family man. He was married twice. The first marriage quickly broke up, but few people knew about it. Ridgway was not a person who took personal problems out into the open. He lived with his second wife for many years, and she herself later admitted that she could not even imagine that a serial killer lived next to her. In her eyes, he was a caring, attentive, sometimes even excessively religious man. In the family, Ridgway had a reputation as a calm father. He spent time with his son, participated in his life, and tried to appear responsible. All this made him completely invisible as a potential criminal. A neighbor might have an old car, another might have strange behavior, but Ridgway, that quiet man who mows the lawn and greets everyone, no one even considered him a suspect. And it was this normality that became his main weapon. While detectives checked criminal authorities, people with mental disorders, aggressive men with a history of violence, the real killer sat at his workplace with a cup of coffee, signing invoices or repairing car doors. He was so familiar to his surroundings that he was literally unnoticed. Another detail that helped him avoid suspicion for decades was his profession. As a truck driver, Ridgway traveled a lot in the area, often stopping on the side of the road, driving to the same places where women disappeared. For other drivers, it was work. For him, a cover. All his routes seemed absolutely normal because he was performing official tasks. No one asked questions. Outside of work, he also seemed completely harmless. A safe, predictable man who rarely raised his voice, even in conflict situations. But behind this external silence was another person, a cold-blooded predator who knew how to behave in such a way that he would not be noticed. While the police spent huge resources, interviewing hundreds of people and checking every thread, Ridgway remained at large, calm and confident that no one would suspect him. Almost 20 years have passed since the first crimes. The Green River Killer case was already considered one of the most painful defeats of American forensic science. But at the beginning of the new millennium, the situation changed. DNA analysis technologies took a huge step forward, and investigators decided to return to evidence that had been lying in archives for years, without hope of a result. In 2001, the Washington State Police ordered a re-examination of old samples. The laboratory compared the new, much more accurate results with those taken back in 1987 during the interrogation of one of the suspects, Gary Ridgway. What once seemed hopeless now took a matter of weeks. The result was unambiguous. A complete genetic match, without a doubt. For detectives, this was the moment for which many of them had worked for decades. All the pieces of the puzzle finally fell into place. A quiet man who had been on the sidelines of the investigation for years turned out to be exactly the man they had been looking for since the early 1980s. On November 30th, 2001, Gary Ridgway was arrested at his workplace, at a truck factory. He offered no resistance. He made no attempt to escape. His demeanor was calm, almost indifferent. According to detectives, it was this cool composure that shocked them the most. It seemed as if he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. During the first interrogations, Ridgway behaved reservedly, said little, and avoided details. He spoke calmly, without remorse, and without excuses. His tone was cold, almost ordinary. It was this lack of emotion that scared him more than any words. Each confession brought the case closer to completion. For the police, it was the finale of a long-term investigation. For the families of the victims, it was a chance to finally learn the truth. Investigators were getting closer to a solution. After decades of fruitless searching, DNA analysis provided the answer they had been waiting for years. The evidence was so compelling that there was no longer any doubt. It was not a ghostly suspect who appeared before the law enforcement officers, but a specific person, Gary Ridgway. Realizing that this time he would not be able to escape responsibility, Ridgway agreed to a deal with the prosecutor's office. His motive was simple and cold: to save his own life. In exchange for refusing the death penalty, he pledged to fully admit his guilt and help investigators find the burial places of the victims, many of whom had been considered missing for years. For the families of the deceased, this was hope for at least a minimal answer, where their loved ones lay. Ridgway began to cooperate, showing forest areas, roadsides, and remote areas where he had left the bodies. Some of these places shocked even experienced investigators. In 2003, Gary Ridgway officially pleaded guilty to 48 murders. Later, another one was added to this list. The court verdict was uncompromising. Ridgway was sentenced to 48 life terms, without the right to parole. He will never be released again. The most emotional moment of the trial was the speeches of the relatives of the victims. Words of pain, anger, and despair sounded in the courtroom. Someone could not hold back tears. Someone screamed, looking the killer in the eyes. But there were also those who unexpectedly spoke of forgiveness. These words sounded hard and painful, but they became one of the most memorable moments of the entire trial. Gary Ridgway listened in silence, without emotion, without remorse. The court put an end to it. Gary Ridgway received 48 life sentences without the right to parole. His story ended behind bars forever. The Gary Ridgway case is now studied in forensic science as one of the most important examples of why preserving evidence is crucial, even after decades. What once seemed hopeless and outdated has, with the development of science, become the key to solving one of the most terrible serial crimes in the United States. It was this case that forced law enforcement agencies to take a new look at the so-called cold cases. In the United States, new standards were developed for the storage of biological samples, evidence, and materials that previously could be destroyed or lost years after the crime. Now they began to systematically archive them with the expectation of future reanalysis. In addition, the Ridgway case became a strong argument for increasing government funding for forensic genetics. Laboratories received more modern equipment, and specialists received additional training and the opportunity to introduce new DNA research methods. This significantly accelerated the discovery of other serial crimes and gave a chance for justice in cases that had remained unsolved for years. The story of Gary Ridgway proved that time does not always work against the truth. On the contrary, if evidence is preserved and technology develops, it can become an ally of justice. That is why this case is still considered a turning point in the history of forensics and forensic genetics. Today, Gary Ridgway is still serving his sentence in a Washington state prison. He will spend the rest of his life there, without a chance of release and without the opportunity to return to the ordinary world.